Hey there again, as I'm sure you all know, beta is on its way on Thursday, so I'm doing my best to get some quick crash courses together for the classes that I've been testing. This video then will cover things that have changed in the alpha that you might need to know about when you're jumping into Legion for the first time. Here, I'm going to be looking at Enhancement, being the spec that I focus on the most, and I know a lot of you guys are interested in what I've got from it. And it is one I've covered a great deal comprehensively, so I'm going to break this down between abilities and gameplay, talents, stats, and lastly, I'm going to look at the complete package for the spec. I am going to assume that you're relatively familiar with the class abilities and things that have changed, but if not, you can refer over to the more elaborate video series I did earlier on in the alpha to get a bearing on what Blizzard changed about the toolkit and how the talent tree shifted around. So this is going to serve as both a quick pick up and play guide for those just getting into the beta, and an update to those videos as a whole for those of you who are trying to keep up. Getting right into the first and most important part then is gameplay. The biggest change you're going to notice the first time that you log in and play Enhancement is that we're no longer constrained to our cooldowns on our spells. We're now resource locked, and we have a build-spend relationship between a few spells that generate, those being most importantly Rock Biter, although talents can change which spell that is, and spells that spend. The filler being Lava Lash, which again is a low damage fire hit from your offhand, and a big hit from Storm Strike, which has now been buffed up, but costs quite a bit of Maelstrom and has a hefty cooldown attached. Storm Strike also has been given a bit of life added into it through Mastery, which has now kept its elemental damage aspect that it's always had since way back when we got Mastery in Cataclysm. It now has a proc attached, in which it will reset the cooldown of Storm Strike, cause the next Storm Strike to cost half the amount of Maelstrom, and not incur a cooldown. So effectively, when you get a proc, you can do 2 back-to-back big Storm Strike hits. This scales up at quite a low rate with Mastery, but it is still really significant, and your Mastery now also affects your Wind Fury chance from your main hand attacks. Wind Fury still doesn't do a great deal of damage when it procs, but each one of those hits does trigger the Maelstrom generation that comes from your auto attacks called Maelstrom Weapon. This is each of your attacks generating 5 Maelstrom, which is a 1/6 of a Lava Lash cast, or an 1/8 of a Storm Strike cast, generally speaking, and it also does trigger from your actual spellcasts. So Lava Lash and Storm Strike both trigger and gain 5 and 10 Maelstrom respectively when you cast them. There are some extra factors that are important to your DPS, the first being Flame Tongue, which is now going to be like a combination of Unleash Elements and Flame Shock. You're going to cast this, it deals a slight amount of fire damage, and then for the next 15 seconds, all of your melee strikes are going to be dealing a small amount of AP in fire damage to the targets when you hit them. This means that it scales up your auto attacks, and it also does trigger off your actual casts. So this is just basically a maintenance buff that you're going to be using all the time, and try and keep on cooldown, really roll it to get a bit of extra oomph from those auto hits. Feral Spirit has also shifted slightly. It is now our only major cooldown that comes baseline, and instead of just being a pet damage cooldown, it now gives you a constant generation to Maelstrom, giving you 5 Maelstrom per hit that the wolves do, which generally they're going to be doing around about 30 hits over the course of its cooldown, and it's on a 15-second duration, 2-minute cooldown. This shifts it over a lot more to our damage that they're amping up then. And it also gives them a bit more application in AoE, where Maelstrom is quite important to keep spending and keep that damage rolling over the course of an AoE encounter. Speaking of AoE, AoE has completely changed now. Fire Nova is sadly gone, and I'm sure many will miss it because it was really amazing, but obviously a little bit too strong now since we're shifting away from that extreme AoE niche. It's now been replaced by a different tool called Crash Lightning. This deals a reasonably high amount of instant damage with your main hand to all targets in a cone in front of you, and costs a small amount of Maelstrom, being 20, and then gives you a buff which causes all of your Storm Strikes and Lava Lashes to splash a small amount of weapon-based damage. Note, this is not tied to the actual damage that these strikes do, to all targets in the specified area around you. This makes it fairly good for both AoE and cleave, which is something that we have been lacking for a very long time. So this does fill a really interesting spot, and it has cemented us a lot more in the melee battle mage focus, if you will, and less focused on casting so many spells to do everything for us. Lightning Bolt, on the other hand, has been relegated only to basically a pulling tool, although there is a talent if you're really desperate to keep it in your rotation. It does very little damage, doesn't really scale up very well, but it has no cooldown and is always instant. So if you want to grab a mob from 30 yards away and keep it in the AoE fest while you're doing your crash lightnings and everything, there's no penalty at all. Lastly, there is one of the more controversial mechanics that they've added into Enhancement, which is Stormlash. The best way to think about this spell is to effectively think of it as a free damage proc that's going to affect you, but if you're in a group, it's going to affect 2 other people, which may not include you. It scales only from your stats, and it is dependent on the amount of time left on the buff. Without going into too many complex details, it basically does a reasonable amount of nature damage over the course of it, and there's not really any interaction or anything that you need to worry about too much. Just think of it as a free bit of damage that happens every so often. One of the key buzzword topics that's been going on over Legion is mobility and defense. At the moment, we've lost Enhanced Unleash that we had in Warlords, which was the free small sprint whenever we cast Unleash elements. However, we've retained Spirit Walk and Ghost Wolf, and we now have a mobility tier on the talent tree, so all things considered, it could be worse. We aren't the best, most mobile class, but we're also a lot better off than some of the others, so you'll definitely feel like you have the ability to move around a lot using your tools properly, but they are a lot more reliant on pre-planning than they ever have been. Defense-wise, Shamanistic Rage is gone, unfortunately, and it has been replaced by Astral Shift from the talent tree, which is also, of course, missing from the talent tree now. It's the exact same as the live Warlord's talent for Astral Shift, without any real changes otherwise, so we have lost out a little bit on defense. However, at the same time, Healing Surge has been buffed up, and it now does a lot more healing and isn't requiring any Maelstrom to bump that up. You can, however, force it to be an instant cast by spending Maelstrom on it, and it can sustain you very well in PvE, especially in raids and dungeons if you use it proactively. Unfortunately, since we are GCD locked now, because we can always generate or spend, that means that the opportunity cost of casting one has gone up almost linearly with the increase in the value of the cast itself. Okay, up next is talents. This tree has changed almost completely from what we've had in the Warlords, and there's a lot more DPS tiers. It's much more focused. There are some very, very important talents that are important to try and use to see if you can get used to them, because they are a massive increase. For example, Boulder Fist is almost 4 times as strong as any other talent on that tier, and it's not really that much of a massive gameplay change, and wrapping your head around how to use it properly isn't too much of an ask, given how much of an impact it's going to have on your overall damage. There's some very clear AoE and single target talent separation, in particular, for example, Hailstorm versus Crashing Storm. Hailstorm is obviously a single target talent because it only hits your current target, whilst Crashing Storm hits all targets around you when you use an AoE spell for a period of time, which makes it very clear as the distinction of which talent you want to take on that tier depending on the situation. Other examples include Earthen Spike versus Fury of Air on the top tier. Fury of Air obviously being the AoE choice because it deals damage in the targets around you, whilst Earthen Spike is on your target. So you have to identify the type of fight or the type of situation that you're going to be getting yourself into before you can optimally tailor your talent tree around that. There's also some more thematic specs that exist now. You can now go for a full enhancement build in which you enhance yourself, no pun intended, by using talents like Landslide, Boulder Fist, Hailstorm, or Windsong. These are all short, buff duration tracking enhancements that you cast on yourself and do a little bit of cursory damage, but they all amp up your constant single target damage. So it's your choice whether you want to play with those. None of them are a particularly bad choice in terms of the build that you want to go with, so I'd say definitely experiment around, see what works for you, see what you enjoy when you're playing them and getting used to how things have changed. There are, however, 2 talents that I would warn you about that are currently effectively duds, and that would be Lightning Shield and Overcharge. Lightning Shield currently doesn't seem to be tuned properly, and Overcharge has far too much of a loss from taking it, and is far too easy to misuse or be impacted negatively in the rest of your rotation if you try and capitalize on it. So that one I would definitely steer clear of right now. The general single target build that I'd work with right now would be starting with Boulder Fist because it currently grants that massive passive buff when you cast it. It also increases the damage of Rockbiter and it's more Maelstrom per cast. Effectively, everything you could possibly think of that would be good to make Rockbiter stronger, they put it all in at once, and that's why it's just that damn strong. Next is Feral Lunge, just because it's most versatile. You can use it out in the open world, in dungeons, in raids. It just is a charge. It's very simple. I'd grab that. After that, you can grab Lightning Surge. Really, this tier is a bit of a wash. It's nothing special. It's all very niche CC type utility. So I grab Lightning Surge just because it's like Capacitor Totem Glyph, and it's very much familiar for anyone who's played Enhancement. Then I'd take Ancestral Swiftness. It's simply the strongest talent on the tier, and not only that, it's also completely passive, so you can't really make a mistake with it. It speeds up the rotation a little bit, which is also good when you want to get back into the feel of Warlords, which was a bit more fast-paced at the very base. After that, I'd take Landslide. This plays in very well with Boulder Fist, because you want to be using Boulder Fist for offensive damage anyway, and it gives you that free attack power buff, which you're going to be maintaining regardless. So again, on that tier, it's the hardest to mess up, and it's also got the most tangible benefit, so definitely go with that one. The next two tiers are purely single target, so the first being Hailstorm. This plays into the enhancement style gameplay, and it also works well with a couple of the legendaries that you're going to be getting later on, if you want to factor that in. It's not really that much of a massive difference, it's just that it's got the least negative impact on your Maelstrom while still giving you a damage bump on that tier. And the last tier is basically between two, and it's dealer's choice on which one you want to take. Earthen Spike is the more consistent, single target, bursty, windowed type of talent, whilst Ascendance is basically the exact same as the Ascendance that we've all played with for 4 years now. So if you want to grab that just for the comfort, that's fine. The difference between the two of them isn't very much, and generally speaking, Earthen Spike is a little bit more difficult to get used to because it's another cooldown to track, so Ascendance might be the most comfortable. The changes for an AoE build would switch up Hailstorm for Crashing Storm. This is basically Crash Lightning with a bit of Consecration attached. Deals a lot of damage constantly, is very easy to keep and maintain, and generally speaking, it's one of our best AoE tools. After that, in the last tier, we have the, while significantly nerfed, Fury of Air. This is mostly for really long, sustained AoE. In bursty windows, it does drain quite a lot of Maelstrom, and it becomes quite noticeable, so you actually do need to micromanage it now. However, I would say, in AoE, neither of the other two options really have any effect to the extent that Fury of Air will, so I'd grab that. Last, to cap it off, the artifact active Doom Winds is a massive, huge damage surge when you use it, and the bonus chances for Stormbringer to proc when that's up, and the extra free Maelstrom that you get, makes this a really punchy, damaging cooldown, to the extent where it's actually better than Feral Spirit when you use it. I'd use this often and as frequently as possible, but do try and make sure that you sync it up with other cooldowns, or most importantly, you sync it up with windows that are important to burn down targets. In the open world as well, it does have the fairly significant advantage of when you hit this, you're going to get so much Maelstrom that you can spam heal yourself in an emergency, so just make sure that you realise just how amazing and versatile Doom Winds actually is. Next up, we've got stats for enhancement. These are pretty set in stone right now, and they have been since really early on in the alpha, so I'm going to put them in the top right of the screen, I think, and it's going to be agility, then mastery, then haste, then verse, which is about equal to crit. Mastery is the best because on top of it already keeping the elemental damage, which is important for spells like Lava Lash, Flame Tongue, Hailstorm, anything that really ties into the elemental damage theme. It also got the additional bonus of now scaling with Storm Strike via the Stormbringer procs, and directly interacting with our resource through the additional Wind Fury procs that it scales up. Generally, it just scales the absolute best. It has the best interaction with all of your important spells that you're going to be using, so definitely the stat to stack. Haste is still up there, it's just not as important now because we aren't as tied to Flurry and the global cooldown reductions, but it does still have that impact on your GCD, and it does increase the amount of Maelstrom you generate because your auto attacks are still important. It's definitely the second best stat. Generally speaking, most of the gear that you want to be looking for in Legion is going to be Mastery, Haste. Those are the pieces that are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. Much like it has been for a long time, crit and verse, however, don't really get anything for us. So they aren't really stats that you want to stack, they're just there for a bit of bonus if they happen to be on a piece of gear. I wouldn't really go for crit or verse, because generally, they're not going to give you anything special, and they don't have any interactions with anything important. And the final part of the video, the overall package, and a few tips and pointers from me, from what I've learned whilst I've played it on the alpha. First and foremost, the first thing that you want to get used to is the resource management that you're going to have to adjust yourself to, because that is going to be the crux of enhancement for the entirety of Legion. It's arguably more important than the cooldown management and the juggling was in WoD, so really, once you can get that under control, where you're comfortable with how much you're getting in and how much you need to spend to keep the resource under control and be able to keep up with Stormbringer procs, then you're going to be golden and you can start learning the more fine-tuned or niche things to get optimal. On that same note, you've got to be ready to react to procs. Similar to how Lava Lash procs were in Warlords, Stormbringer is absolutely vital to be able to perform properly. Given that it's so cheap and it does so much damage, and it is such a core to the stats that you're going to be stacking, and later when the artifact gets involved, the amount of pure damage that one does, you really need to be able to manage your globals so that you don't waste a proc or you don't get overwhelmed by them too much. Whilst at the same time being able to follow that priority list, since we still work on one of those, lest you fall behind and then you get into the weeds. Wasting your global cooldowns, again, much like it has been for a long time now, is wasting a lot of damage. Much like the casters, it's always been ABC, you want to always be casting, and that is no less true this time around in Legion. You've got to make sure that you're thinking at least 1 or 2 globals ahead, what you're going to be pressing, what you might be able to do if a proc gets in the way, and also when you need to keep those buffs refreshed if you're using any of those talents. Learn how to generally predict the AoE cone and the range for Crash Lightning. It can be a bit cumbersome, and actually learning it yourself, once you've got that under wraps, you need to rely less on guesswork, because sometimes, compared to say Fire Nova, where it hit anything and it was nearly impossible to miss, Crash Lightning very easily can be missed. And if you do miss that initial hit, then you're going to lose the splash damage until it comes back off cooldown, which is quite punishing in constant AoE. If you're going to use short buff talent oriented builds, do keep track of them using either the Blizzard UI or any of the other add-ons that are currently working on the alpha, such as weak auras. And then you've got to get prepared to manage those global cooldowns accordingly. Don't become a slave to the timers where you end up getting towards the end and they're all coming off at once and you need to rush to get them back up. Sometimes you can sacrifice a little bit of uptime so that they're going to stay up and roll over so that procs don't eat them up. Lastly, you need to be able to plan your movement much more ahead of time now. You want to be thinking when you need to move and when you don't need to move, when you have movement resources to spare and when you don't, because in the Legion world, avoiding damage is really important. You've also got to be ready to reactively heal with Healing Surge, as we've lost Shamanistic Rage, rest in peace, and when you do take that damage, accidentally or not, because you didn't plan your movement properly, you're going to have to be able to sacrifice a little bit of damage to Healing Surge yourself back up, because it's a potent tool and you don't want to waste it. So, I hope you guys appreciated a quick look at Enhancement as it stands right now following the end of the alpha. And even more so, I hope you all get into the beta and you get a good chance to give it a try, and this helps you with adjusting to the major changes that the spec has had to go through, and don't get too overwhelmed with everything all at once. I'll be following this up ideally with a quick rundown of some of the endgame tips and pointers that I've found so far in the dungeons and the raids that we've seen before the raid tests start up again, so keep your eyes out for those, which should be on their way in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you want to see more, subscribe and share, as it does help massively, and I'll see you next time in the next video.